Notifications pinging, feeds endlessly refreshing, that constant heavy pressure to build a following, to curate the perfect aesthetic, to somehow maintain a spotless profile. Look, the sheer chaotic volume of noise we face every single day is absolutely overwhelming. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something completely fascinating. We are going to try to cut through all of that modern digital chaos by actually looking backward. And I mean way backward. We're examining a really intriguing document titled Enoch Through the Lens of Biblical Counseling for Young People. Okay, let's get right into this.
So here's the big question. How do you actually survive a hyper-distracted, digitally obsessed world? Seriously, think about that for a second. It is literally the defining struggle of our time, especially for young people who are just trying to figure out who they are and what on earth their purpose is. The source text we're exploring today proposes a deeply grounding solution to all of this. And ironically, to fix our ultra-modern digital chaos, the answer comes from a 5,000-year-old story. We're looking at the life of Enoch as a literal blueprint for walking in a distracted world. This explainer is going to break down how these ancient texts actually offer an incredibly relevant, step-by-step guide for modern life, showing us how to pull away from the noise and focus on what actually builds a lasting foundation.
What's truly fascinating here is the progression. Our source material analyzes Enoch across 3 distinct ancient texts, and they perfectly mirror the ideal path for a young person today. Step 1, in Genesis, he simply walked with God. Step 2, in the Book of Jubilees, he received instruction and learned truth. And then Step 3, in the Book of Enoch, he steps outward as the prophetic witness to the world. You see it? It's a progression from an inward foundation all the way to an outward impact.
All right, let's look at the first major takeaway. Walk before you lead. Before Enoch was ever a public voice or a leader of any kind, he was known simply for his private, quiet walk. When we compare these texts side by side, notice how his identity and leadership actually evolve. In Genesis, there's absolutely zero public leadership described, none. His entire identity is just wrapped up in being a man who walked with God. It's only way later, in Jubilees and the Book of Enoch, that he becomes this teacher, this prophetic witness, and a spiritual guide who leads people with justice and peace. His leadership began with self-control and a completely private walk long before he ever tried to lead anyone else.
The application here for young people today is so incredibly striking. Your identity absolutely shouldn't begin with your follower count, your physical appearance, or your popularity. In a culture that is completely obsessed with clout and visibility, this ancient blueprint is basically saying, stop. Start with your relationship with God. True identity has to be grounded privately before it can ever be expressed publicly.
And that leads us to a profoundly deep counseling reflection from our source. Who are you becoming when nobody is watching? Let that just sink in for a minute. When the cameras are off, when your phone is plugged in across the room, who is that person? Because that right there, that is your true identity.
Moving right along to the next phase of his journey. Learn before you teach.
Once that private identity is solidly established, his purpose really starts to build. Notice how knowledge and purpose shift across the literature here. In Genesis, Enoch's purpose isn't even explained in detail. Knowledge isn't emphasized at all. But God reveals purpose while we walk with him. By the time we look at the text of Jubilees, his purpose has become teaching wisdom. But look at the specific order. He learns, he receives instruction, and only then does he write and teach. He gathers insight way before he attempts to guide the generations around him.
This brilliantly illustrates a massive problem we have today. We are constantly, endlessly consuming content. We doom scroll for hours, letting totally random information flood our brains every single second. But the ancient text points us toward consuming actual truth, because wisdom isn't just knowing facts or seeing a bunch of posts. Wisdom is actively choosing truth and actually living it out. Enoch received instruction long before he ever gave it.
So we really have to ask ourselves this question from the source material. Are you consuming more content than truth? Are you just filling your head with endless scrolling? Or are you actually taking the time to learn and embody wisdom before you go out there and try to preach all your opinions to the world?
Which brings us to our next critical point. Influence begins in private.
We usually tend to think of influence as having the loudest megaphone, right? But the source material shows us that real, lasting impact is actually forged in quiet, unseen moments. A really clear pattern emerges when we look at his relationship with God and how he handled isolation. Enoch actively separated himself to seek God's instruction. He spent intentional time apart. His public ministry and his ability to receive revelation only came after this private communion. He didn't just avoid being alone, he actually utilized it.
Now, this distinction is incredibly important for today's youth. There is a world of difference between loneliness, which is painful isolation and withdrawal, and healthy solitude. The source highlights that for Enoch, solitude was preparation. It was deeply intentional time spent with God. Healthy solitude actually empowers you, whereas forced withdrawal just drains you.
Because, let's be honest, if your entire spiritual life or your whole identity is built on a public performance, it is incredibly fragile. The text poses this really hard-hitting reflection. If your social media totally disappeared tomorrow, would your faith actually remain strong? If the audience vanished, would the foundation still hold up? That's exactly why true influence has to begin in private.
Next up, we have this crucial concept, different but not distant. So once that private foundation is firmly built, Enoch doesn't just stay hidden in a cave forever. This is where his quiet preparation turns into loud, incredibly necessary impact. Looking at how he faced corruption, we see that he returned. He came back to warn people when society was drifting. He directly confronted rebellion and corruption. He basically transformed his quiet influence into a bold voice that spoke to entire generations. He engaged with the world's messiness in order to guide it.
And here is the core application drawn directly from the text. Young believers can completely stand for truth without becoming harsh or prideful about it. Enoch teaches us that you can be different. You can totally hold fast to wisdom without becoming distant, arrogant, or completely disconnected from the exact people who need that wisdom the most. True influence isn't measured by views. It's measured by transformed lives.
It's a really tough balance we all have to strike. How can you stay grounded and holy without totally isolating yourself from everyone else? How do you walk into a chaotic, distracted room and actually bring peace instead of just adding to the noise or, just running away from it entirely?
And finally, our last major theme, testimony over a profile.
That ultimate impact leads us to this final long-game contrast. Today, we are absolutely obsessed with building a profile. Fame, our appearance, constantly curating followers. Honestly, it's exhausting and it is entirely temporary. Enoch, on the other hand, was focused on leaving a testimony, faithfulness, obedience, leaving a true, lasting witness for future generations. Success, according to this ancient blueprint, has literally nothing to do with becoming famous. Success is simply remaining faithful to the message. Your choices today are shaping a future that might influence people you will never even meet.
Which brings us perfectly to the core memory verse highlighted in the text, Genesis 5:24. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. This right here is the ultimate metric of success in Enoch's story. It was measured simply, beautifully, by his closeness to God.
So as we wrap up this explainer, the source material boils everything down to these three massive existential questions that young people are constantly asking themselves. Question 1, who am I? The Enoch blueprint answers very clearly, walk with God. Question 2, what should I do? The answer, learn wisdom and then actually live it out. And question 3, how can I make an impact? The answer, be faithful in private way before you start demanding to be visible in public. I'm going to leave you with this final, genuinely provocative thought from the source text. When all the noise finally fades, when all the digital profiles are completely gone, if someone described your life in one single sentence, what would they say? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating ancient blueprint with us today. Keep walking, keep learning, and start building a real testimony.